Hi everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. I feel like it would be odd if I didn't at least mention the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook fiasco which has been unfolding for the last week. Recently, noticeably, Elon Musk deleted the Facebook pages for Tesla and SpaceX this week, and in doing so removed a platform on which they had tens of millions of followers. Elon and Mark Zuckerberg famously have had disagreements on the potential harms of artificial intelligence, so it may be fair to assume that Elon and Mark share some ideological differences on multiple fronts. Many appear to be following Elon's lead and are deleting their Facebook accounts too. Personally, I feel like this is really just the tip of the iceberg, and it seems like many don't realize how much data they are giving away on any given day to numerous different sources. I'm not as smart as Musk or Zuckerberg, but since this is my podcast, I can pretend like I am and give my own advice to you. Realize, no free service is actually free. You're giving up something in return for the service. If you don't want somebody to know something, don't post it online, don't save it on a computer. Hell, to be extra sure, don't even write it down on a piece of paper. Keep it up in your noggin. Now I'll take off my tinfoil hat and get off of my stupid soapbox. This week saw the launch of Windows Server 2019 Preview, which has brought many new exciting features with it, including greater integration for hybrid cloud scenarios, extending Active Directory, synchronizing file servers, and backup in the cloud, as well as enabling us to take advantage of Azure AI and IoT for on-premises applications. Project Honolulu features in Microsoft's Cloud Blog article for this preview launch, and is something mentioned in the last episode of this podcast. If you're not familiar with it, it's a really awesome web-based successor to the old limited server manager tool. Server 2019 will also embrace hyper-converged infrastructure, with Microsoft claiming to have partnered with industry-leading hardware vendors to ensure with 2019 they will be providing an affordable, extremely robust solution. It appears with this blog post and also other posts from the Windows Defender team, Microsoft are also investing pretty heavily in the security space by using telemetry and their powerful analytics along with container technology to execute a protect, detect, and respond approach. It was suggested they will be extending their shielded VM feature to include Linux VMs too. The most exciting announcement in my opinion as an apps guy is the improvements for Windows Server containers and Windows subsystem on Linux. Kubernetes is currently in beta and will be supported in the future. Microsoft have also committed to reducing the server core base image to a third of its current size, which is currently 5 gigs. Even at a third of the size, it will still be relatively large for its purpose, but it's an improvement for sure. Overall, the features highlighted represent a massive change in focus and direction for Windows Server. Hyper-converged infrastructure is growing rapidly. Containers are no longer just a developer tool. They are featuring more and more in production environments. And with, you may have guessed it, Facebook even having claimed themselves that they've created their own container-based technology and actually created it earlier than Docker and have been using it successfully for years to rapidly scale for users' needs. All of this tells me that Microsoft are making sure Windows Server stays relevant for organizations as they move toward the cloud, catering for both traditional on-premises Windows Server use cases as well as the more modern cloud-based use cases. Speaking of traditional on-premises use cases, a noticeable absentee in this preview is the remote desktop session host feature under the remote desktop services role. It appears this has not been addressed currently by Microsoft at the time of this podcast, but one has to wonder what this means for those of us using products like Remote Apps, Zen App, Horizon Apps, and Parallels Remote Application Server. There's plenty of speculation out there on Twitter what this could mean, but I guess time will tell. A quick follow-up to the RDP vulnerability mentioned in last week's episode. If you didn't listen last week, there's a major vulnerability in RDP, similar to some previous vulnerabilities, which allows somebody to hack into any session without credentials. This came to a head this week with reports that some of the local government offices in Atlanta may have been breached due to having public-facing machines with RDP open. The good news, as mentioned last week, is there's already a patch, And last week, the suggestion was make sure your firewall is on and patch as soon as possible. Seriously, never have a publicly exposed machine with RDP open. You're just asking for problems. In other news, it appears with version 18.02 of Config Manager, we've finally got a primary user column when displaying devices. This is something MBAM actually had in version 1.0, and it's very useful information. SetACL turned 17 years old this week. SetACL is the best tool to use for setting ACLs. Personally, I've used cackles, xcackles, icackles, secedit, other options inside of packaging tools and some other management tools, and nothing has come close to SetACL. In fact, even 17 years later, this is likely going to feature on this podcast's scripts, tricks, and tips segment somewhere down the line. And in something a little bit different to end the news segment, Ashley McNamara has launched a store for her great Gopher artwork. Yes, I did say Gopher artwork. So why am I talking about Gopher art on a tech podcast, you may ask? Well, these Gopher doodles have become pretty famous online and feature in some of Microsoft's online promotional material. Ashley's a super sharp techie who also just happens to be a very talented artist. I know how popular Ninja Cat has become and other tech mascots, so I figure these little gophers might catch on in some way. Her Rick and Morty gophers are a particular favorite of mine, so congrats to Ashley on launching her store. And now for this episode's hot job. Microsoft are hiring a senior security PM based in Redmond at their headquarters. The successful candidate will work with teams across Microsoft to rapidly defend Microsoft and its customers against the kind of threats that I feature on this podcast every week. This person will report regularly to senior leaders, including the CEO. The candidate must have 5 years or more of project management or incident response experience, 2 years experience working directly on product or service security vulnerabilities or incident management, a degree in computer science or equivalent experience, whatever that means, and obviously the usual bullshit lines about having passion for what you do, yada yada yada. And now for this week's scripts, tricks, and tips. Dave Brett, one of the smartest guys in the Citrix community, has published a great free monitoring tool for use with a XenApp and XenDesktop 7.x. The setup couldn't be easier as it's PowerShell driven and available in the gallery. Dave has provided a useful short YouTube video on how to get started. Dave says in his blog post that he's not trying to compete with any of the many different vendors in this space, but I will say this is an excellent companion for Citrix Director and well worth a look. If you decide to add on to it, Dave asks that you please share your work so he can add it in and make it available for others. As always, links for everything I referenced in this podcast can be found in the YouTube description for this week's episode, as well as on my site. Thanks very much for listening.